Well, Thursday Night Football on Prime Video is off to its best start ever. Through the first 6 games, TNF on Prime is averaging over 13 million viewers, which is about 12% above last year's average, 39% over 2 years in 2022. So the chart is shooting up. We're pleased to talk with Mike Muriano. He's executive producer of live sports at Prime Video to reflect on everything that's gone down so far and maybe get a little bit of a preview of what's to come in this season of Thursday Night Football. Mike, congratulations on the early season success. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing great, Brandon. And again, thank you for having me and doing well.
So obviously, viewership numbers have been very good. It's been a fun project to watch for us on the outside. But for you behind the scenes, how has the season gone so far from a production operation standpoint? And maybe what have been some of the highlights so far for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really been exceptional so far. And I don't say that flippantly or lightly. You mentioned some of the numbers, and that's obviously something that's important. Obviously we want to do this. We want people to watch it. We want people to enjoy it. So where we are from a viewership standpoint, we're very happy with that. Obviously, want to keep that trend continuing. And I think, the way that we look at that, we know that we can't flat out control what those viewership numbers are. But I think, part of the approach that we always take, and this will extrapolate over other sports properties too as our portfolio grows. But we want to make sure that when people are with us and they're making that decision or commitment to spend some time with us, and in a perfect world for us, of course, they're joining us from pre all the way through post. We know that that's not necessarily the case, but our goal is always to assume that someone out there is watching for the first time. And we keep an eye on that data as well. But someone out there is watching for the first time. And we also have people that are watching us not for the first time. And we want to make sure that, whether the game on the field happens to play out to be a great game or not a great game, that we're delivering a show, coverage, a product that is enjoyable for those people that are watching, that have been there with us for a little bit, or maybe are coming first time, so that when they see how we're approaching the game coverage, how we're approaching the shoulder programming coverage. So everything from what Al and Kirk and Kaylee and the production team are doing on the game to what Carissa and the gang are doing in pre, half, and post. We want to make sure if people are joining us that we never lose sight of, look, someone might be joining us for the first time. Let's make sure that we're showing them what we're about and how we approach our coverage style. Let's obviously hope for a good game. We can't control that. But if we get both of those, great. But we want to make sure that when people are coming to us, return or first time, that we take an approach that we're showing, we're kind of like unloading our coverage arsenal, if you will, and letting them see that, feel that, and hopefully, again, keep them coming back. And what we've seen so far in the numbers this year have been very welcome. And, we must make sure that we continue to do what we can do to continue that growth and that viewership.
Sure, sure. So obviously you guys, and not that Thursday Night Football as a general concept is super new or anything, but when you guys, being the sole holders of it now, what's your weekly routine like? You're operating on a different schedule than the entire rest of the league. You, every other broadcaster, and then the two teams that happen to be involved in that game. We know that the challenges that come with that, but for those who work in the industry who've maybe never done Thursday Night Football, who are kind of interested in the differences, what's your weekly routine like, and how is it noticeably different from, like I said, the clock that seemingly the rest of the league is on?
It's a great question. Again, because there are nuances and differences too. And, a fun fact here that may be fun for only me, but it is a fact. In some form or fashion, and it's funny, I didn't realize this until about a year ago. In some form or fashion, I've been directly or indirectly linked to every iteration of Thursday Night Football going back to 2006, with 18 years of NFL Network. Was there, from when it launched as a 6-game package in the middle of the season, and then when we started the partnership model, working with CBS, and then CBS NBC, and then NBC, and then Fox, and then now, of course, Amazon. And so the one thing that we did, an unintentional but heck of a job in all those prior years with Thursday Night Football was, we certainly didn't help ourselves, I think, to the degree of maybe confusing people where to find it on a given year. And sometimes there was change over the middle of the year. So one of the things I think that is great is from just a viewership standpoint, we know where to find it now for the next, going back from the start of the deal for 11 years, which is a great thing. Like it's at one place the whole time. So that's good. As far as the routine, back to the main point of your question, it really is a good question because where we find it's not an insurmountable challenge by any stretch, but the teams, as you would imagine, feel this as well. So when we wrap up and say goodbye and good night from whatever city we're in on a Thursday night, and then we're all typically, for those that don't live in that home city, we're all on planes, trains, and automobiles getting to, where quote unquote home is for us. But the work for that next week is already starting in earnest. Part of that is reviewing the game, reviewing the shoulder programming, watching that, taking notes, what worked, what didn't. That's a very thorough process. Just again, so we can continue to sharpen and hone and get better, and double down on things that we like and further explore things that we like and seem to resonate with the viewer. But the interesting thing is that differs, I think, greatly from Monday or Sunday coverage is we are now we get our ideas and we're organizing our ideas. And a lot of those ideas are asks of the team. And the teams are great to work with. And we know going in, we know it's a short week. We know that pain point for them where all of a sudden everything gets condensed. But whereas a Sunday game crew or a Monday game crew might finish their telecast or their coverage and can potentially hit send immediately on emails looking ahead to the next game.
Sure.
We, as you know, have a game in between. Our two teams participating will have a Sunday game in between. So we're organizing all our ideas. But of course, we have to be ready, as do the teams, to adjust quickly on ideas or storylines or interviews or coverage points that we may want to track down. So we kind of get that together, obviously. But then we have to see how Sunday unfolds. And typically that team communication will start Sunday night. And, we'll usually via email is the first kind of, shot across the bow. Hey, here's what we're thinking. Make these requests, get those in. And that's obviously very coordinated between our game requests and our shoulder requests. So we're not bombarding teams from multiple angles. We try to have kind of one point of contact for both of those entities. Mark Titleman on the game side, Spoon Daftery on the shoulder programming side. They'll do the reach outs to PR, but it does become this kind of nuanced challenge where, again, we always want to take the tact of not forcing storylines. Like the games and the teams and the players will dictate the storylines that we are chasing and or interested in. But a lot of that could change for a variety of reasons before our game happens based on what happens on those Sunday games too. So it's not completely dissimilar to how other networks would approach those requests and kind of that work week. But the cadence is a little bit different too, because like I said, we can't just jump right to the next game. We have to be respectful and should be respectful, obviously, of the Sunday game that's going to happen in between those teams' Thursday games. And also, as I mentioned, be respectful of their short week. It doesn't mean we want to limit ourselves, but we want to be respectful and smart about the requests we're making so that, again, this has to be symbiotic to some degree. And knowing those challenges, we want to be respectful of that, but still kind of get the access that we're looking for. And the teams, have been great. It's been an evolving process over the lifespan that I've been involved with Thursday Night Football, which again, it's hard to say this without choking on it, but is now coming up on close to 20 years of some form or fashion. And we've seen, I think, taking a smarter, more efficient approach is more effective in creating those relationships and helping foster those relationships. As long as we all know, look, we know it's a short week and we know what we're asking for. It might be a lot, but here's the what and the why. So that's a little bit of the nuance in how that work week kind of flows. If you're curious, I can then tell you then it becomes pretty typical. We have our asks out Sunday night. On the shoulder programming side, we're doing a production meeting with talent on Monday morning, again, rehashing the weekend that just happened, obviously with an emphasis on our teams, but certainly paying attention to other storylines around the league. Most of us on the production side for the shoulder programming are traveling on a Tuesday, and then some Wednesday, and then, of course, game days Thursday, and rinse, lather, repeat.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of gets made about new entities, newish. You guys aren't new, but new entities, quote unquote, finding their sea legs and everything. Not to say that you guys are finding it now. Prime Video, Thursday Night Football has been humming and looking great since it started. But in what ways do you feel behind the scenes the brand, the company, the whole operation, and the way that appears now, having been involved all the different
Sure.
iterations of Thursday Night Football, what do you think have been some of the key learnings along the way for this Prime Video edition of Thursday Night Football and some of the new things you've tried, or getting used to some of those new nuances that you talked about, being a sole exclusive streaming rights holder to this property?
Sure. I mean, look, like anything, and even though so much of the our still relatively speaking small but mighty team, when we go back and start thinking about launch in 2022, that's an amazing ride. And you're it's obviously a lot of work, a lot of challenges in any launch, but there was just a ton of excitement around that too. I think the approach though that has been very rewarding from my perspective, and I think this really translates across the whole team, whether that's game team, pre-half, post team, all of the production support that goes with that. And as you know, it takes a small army to do these games. But just as we start building that, we're always asking ourselves, what would we like to see? What do we think makes the coverage and or storytelling better? And it's funny, you kind of have to walk that line of not doing things for the sake of doing them, or
Mm.
sometimes even making sure that you're engineering your brain to not just do things for other producers and other quote unquote TV people. Remember,
Sure.
it starts with the fan. And for us, it starts with the game coverage of whatever sport we're doing and working backwards from that. And we feel like that really has been a good North Star. The other really rewarding thing that I've seen is, to be completely candid, all of us, or most of us, coming from what I'll call just more traditional media backgrounds. We have people on our team from NBC, from ESPN, from CBS, from NFL Network, all of those collectively. And so to take lessons and observations learned from there and try to apply best practices. But I can wholeheartedly say that one of the most rewarding things is the continual challenge, but also support that we get from leadership to keep pushing envelopes, and to keep, asking what if and can we and what if we tried. Those are big hallmarks that are literally day to day, if not week to week occurrences in how we approach. A really good example of that too, I think, and it could be a whole topic on its own, is how we've approached alt feeds, and
Hmm.
specifically how, with what we've tested and learned and where we found success, I think in the Prime Vision alt feed, and how that serves as a thing where, again, we took an approach early on in the launch, and I think you'll see this apply as we take on other sports. We don't want to shock and awe for the sake of shock and awe, like I touched on earlier. We want viewers that are used to something to be able to come over and say, okay, I get it. This is the game I've always watched. This is the sport I've always watched, or the race I've always watched. But there's these other cool things that I can dive into if I want to, without getting in the way of what might be, one person's version of a traditional viewing experience. And I think Prime Vision really kind of lightens that area where we've done a lot of research, and there's so many inputs on that and so many different teams. And sometimes it can just start from a small idea that becomes a really cool idea. A group of us producers in a room, and then we're able to tap into this amazing component of Amazon scientists, bring in football people, like bring in all kinds of people to come up with what would we want to see, what would enhance the game viewing experience, and really do a lot of testing and learning in the Prime Vision space. And then again, I think what was so rewarding for everyone that has anything to do with Prime Video and Thursday Night Football is to see something like defensive alerts start as an idea, find
Hmm.
its footing on Prime Vision, and then migrate into the main broadcast. And it might sound like hyperbole, but it really isn't. Like, when we were at the very early stages of ideating, and this is 2021, we're talking now, pre-launch, there always was this notion and hope that we could incubate things in Prime Vision. And
Hmm.
candidly, they might not always work,
Sure.
but let's not get hung up on that. Let's find the things that work. And if all goes well, some of that could or might migrate into the main broadcast, the mainstream. And it's done that now, defensive alerts. And that's really exciting that we were able to start with our final game last year, Jets at Browns, and bring defensive alerts to the mainstream. And now it's available on the mainstream for all games. So that kind of thinking has been really energizing, for the main feed. and as well as the alt feeds. And how it also just applies to there are, again, it sounds cliche, but it really holds true. A, there are no dumb ideas, and B, good ideas can come from anywhere. And so,
Sure.
really kind of diving into that ethos. And I think that's something that's very, as us newer to Amazon, what we've really kind of seen as part of that culture where there is a lot of like very wide open blue sky thinking to be able to say, okay, like, don't forget about what cost might be for a second, forget about what challenges might be for a second. Quite simply, what would be cool?
Mhm.
And then can we do it? And then diving into how do we do it? That's been a really, really rewarding thing to see for a lot of us that have come from different places. And that's like part of the DNA already. That's been really rewarding for us as producers for sure.
Yeah, but it's really cool how Prime Vision and fully objectively, that when I'm a neutral fan, which is most
Mm-hmm.
Thursday nights, that's my favorite way to watch it because it's so different from anything else you can usually see when you're watching
Yeah.
NFL football. And to your point, it's really cool to see how it's almost like a lab with glass windows where you can go in and really see something get experimented with, and maybe
Yeah.
to your point, quote unquote, graduate to the main broadcast. And that's not necessarily to your point to say maybe there are certain things that are really cool that will only ever make sense in the Prime Vision broadcast because it's a little more complicated and maybe it's a little more specific to the type of viewer that would watch that. But it
Mm-hmm.
is cool to kind of see how something, if from your perspective, if something's cool for a viewer that they can very quickly get. All right, I think there's probably a way we can work that into the quote unquote main broadcast, I imagine. That's probably got to be a fun exercise, I imagine.
Yeah, I love the way that you used lab and laboratory. Like there is that kind of ethos and thinking for sure. And like I said, it really does essentially serve as a laboratory for those kind of experiments, an incubator. And again, like I said, defensive alerts is the perfect example of that. But then
Mhm.
you start looking at other things that we're playing with that we're seeing already in Prime Vision and plausibly will make that jump as well. But that's the key too, right? Don't force it. It's got to make sense, and you don't want to. Sometimes too many toys for those of us who have kids, but also for those of us
Yeah, yeah.
in the production world. Sometimes too many toys can be a distraction until there really is a honed workflow of how to use it. But I think where we try to be smart and try to be efficient is let's take those guardrails off a little bit, not completely, but off a
Mhm.
little bit in the Prime Vision feed, and then let's really see what's tracking, what's working, and how much is too much, if you will, to then migrate over. So your analogy in the lab, it really does hold true, and that's definitely I think how that specific team works, but also then how that translates to the rest of the production team as well, and the communication is great too because, as mentioned, we still are a relatively small but mighty team. But the integration and the collaboration between all the teams, not and I'm not just even speaking about game production, shoulder production, alt feed production, but then all of the under the hood secret sauce that goes with that
Mhm.
from the technology teams, from our team of scientists in Tel Aviv to our team that's making sure that the stream and the picture and the audio are as good as they can be. It's something that, and I say this in a good way, um, we've been pretty maniacal about from day one. And that has been very just kind of rewarding to see. And again, the hope is, and I think it does, of course, I might be a little biased. I think that is showing up on the glass for people at home.
Nice. So to drill back into the original, to the main broadcast, maybe graphics aside, any key production tools or toys that if you found really valuable this year, whether it's overall image quality, cameras and audio, any significant additions to the plan for this year that you feel have really made an impact?
I think the way that I would answer that, Brandon, too, really is I think, it's never taking the tact from producer director on down through the
Mhm.
whole for the whole team of never just sitting back and saying or thinking, okay, we've got this, we've done this now, we're into our third season, we figured this out. That I think becomes a death knell for all of us. So even as we experiment, always experimenting with different technologies, whether different lenses, I think, one of the things that gets me excited is because I just don't think we've necessarily seen it in a while. Are there different things we can start looking at and doing with camera placements? Is that a world we can start getting into? And so I think, that there's always something, and I'd be lying if I said that I always knew top of mind what was always, tinkering under the hood with different teams. But I think the collective ethos and notion that it is always welcome to come with ideas. And like I said, no idea too big or too small. If we think it's enhancing storytelling, let's give it an honest shake and see what that can be and what that can do. Again, I I'd be lying. I'd be a little bit over my skis to start diving into the technical aspect too. But I think that also speaks to, we're always looking at how can we get picture quality better? How can we get audio quality better? And then also then take it to the more soft ideas. And by soft, I mean, what are just even philosophical things? What are things that we're looking to do in our post-game show, knowing that more or less, just by sheer virtue of time of day, is a late night audience sometimes.
Hmm.
How do we take approaches there? What are we doing differently, or what do we think would be fun for a viewer? Hey, if they've stayed with us this long, from a pregame through a game and into a postgame that on the East Coast is flirting with and going past midnight, how do we keep those folks entertained, as well as entertain ourselves? And I think a huge part of that comes back to as well. In addition to the technology that we look to employ, we've got a very, very eager and curious bunch in front of the camera and behind the camera. And that a lot of that really does start with, one of the main tenets as we were assembling our teams. And like I said, that goes for on air and off air. Curiosity is a huge hallmark for what we're looking for in that space.
Very cool. So as we look ahead to the remainder of the year, I mean, some of the games that you guys have on the schedule are looking really, really good down the line. I
Yeah.
mean, just picking out a few, there's plenty of good ones. But Bengals and Ravens is going to be juicy. Commanders
Mm-hmm.
Eagles is really interesting now. That Packers Lions game in the beginning of December,
Yep.
really, really great matchup. And hell, even if you go to the Week 17 Seahawks Bears, that's a game that could have playoff implications.
For
The way
sure.
that it's shaping up right now. So as you look ahead at the remainder of the year, exciting schedule that you guys have this year, which I'm sure has helped some of the ratings numbers that we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But as you look ahead to the rest of the year, anything in particular you guys are working on behind the scenes that you're excited? Not going to spoil anything, but as you look ahead
Sure.
of the year to come, what are you guys really focused on?
Well, look, you mentioned some of the great games that we hope stay great. On paper, looking ahead, I think you will see some fun things as we get into like different holiday times of year,
Hmm.
whether that's Halloween or Thanksgiving, and we're Thanksgiving adjacent, if you will, with our Black Friday game, with our Raiders Chiefs game on Black
Sure.
Friday. But so we owe it. Look, first and foremost, when it comes to the storytelling, and a lot of this starts with the pre-half post coverage. We try to like, okay, what city are we in? What's the fabric of that city? What are stories to tell in that city? That might be told through a sit down feature. That might be told through a 20-second shot of a landmark or a type of food. All of that fun stuff. But you will see some holiday ideas and some fun stuff around Halloween and Thanksgiving adjacent with Black Friday. And shoot, the games you mentioned, we're certainly hoping for good things. I would be lying if I told you we weren't incredibly fired up for our first wild card game. That's
True.
lurking at the end of the season as well for us too. That is going to be something where, again, as we usually kind of pack up our football tents for the season after week 17 plays out. Now that we know we're also getting ready for a wild card game, that's going to be real fun too. So I'm not at liberty to discuss necessarily yet, but we are planning, some fun things, some different things that you might see in the regular season for our wild card coverage, that just enhance that further. And again, working with the teams, I do think one thing that's interesting for us, as mentioned before, and walking through the paces of the week that are a little bit more challenging for us, given that there's a game in between. Since we won't know our matchup until that final regular season Sunday, our
Hmm.
day or our matchup, I think at least we have a little conditioning to, we know what it's like to work on the quote unquote short week. So we're not looking at that as a insurmountable challenge. We're looking at it as a really fun challenge. Okay, let's get our teams. Let's go. Are we early? Are we late? Okay, let's figure it out and have a great time. So the games you mentioned, we're certainly looking forward to, as well as that wild card coverage and our first wild card coverage as a streamer and as a network is something that we're not only immensely proud in, but really wrapping our arms around of what we can do with that to make it more special.
Well, hopefully we can catch up with you all down the line, maybe around that playoff game time, because that'll be a lot of fun. He's Mike Muriano, executive producer, live sports of Prime Video. You can watch Thursday Night Football streaming on Prime Video every Thursday of the regular season, with a couple of fun days like Black Friday thrown in. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Congrats on how things have gone so far, and best of luck the rest of the way to you and the whole crew.
Thanks so much. This has been great.
All right, for more of us here at Sports Video Group and to read up more of what's going on with all the broadcasters across the NFL, including Prime Video, you can head over to our website at sportsvideo.org. We'll talk to you next time.